DisruptED interviews, and today I have my fabulous friend, ex-colleague and buddy from the DisruptED group of schools, Heemi McDonald, who's joining us from Rototuna Senior School in Hamilton. Welcome, Heemi, how are you?
Good. Kia ora, Claire. Thank you for having me today. Really nice to see you, and also to be connected again with the DisruptED whānau.
Fantastic. And so today we thought we'd take a little bit of a different lens or a different look at the lockdown situation, because we have talked to your fabulous principal, Natasha Himura, about what's happening at Rototuna Senior School as a school in lockdown. What I was really interested in, there was a comment that you made on Twitter, I think it was last week, talking about the idea of, it's sort of like a te ao Māori view or worldview or lens or take on the lockdown, and this concept that as educators, we are now going into the homes of our learners in this remote teaching and learning situation. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you were talking about and where that came from?
Yeah, I guess I will preface that I'm quite passionate, and you'll know this, but those listening to me might not realise I'm quite passionate about the English medium secondary school's role in bettering the outcomes for tamariki Māori, and in particular, how they can apply a Māori lens to the things that they're doing already to build on them and to maybe re-engineer some of them. And so when I was thinking about this COVID experience and reflecting on that, I thought we've gone from the role of being tangata whenua, and tangata whenua is that, you're the local people. You get to determine all of the rules and protocols, and along with being tūranga waiwai or being having that place to stand, there are rights and obligations. And so, tangata whenua, generally when we show up to the marae, there's a workforce there, they provide a kai, they have the facilities, they perform welcomes for people, and then they remove tapu from the visitors or the Manuhiri, which allows them to become one. So they join them together. And then for Manuhiri, you're the visitors. So your role is to respect and honour the kawa or the protocols of the tangata whenua, that often you'll give a koha, and sometimes that koha is money. And so what I was thinking about those concepts, and I'm definitely not implying that schools take the role of tangata whenua or Manuhiri, but the concepts themselves, I think transferring them into the school context helped me to realise that my role as a teacher had shifted from being in the privileged position of tangata whenua to now visiting into the homes of all of these kids. So if you think about, the schools tend to determine, by their nature, they determine the protocols and the practices. Yes. And the kids come and we welcome them with a pōwhiri. We do that every year, or the New Year 9s or the New Year 11s, and we feed their parents a little bit of kai, and we've got the workforce ready, and we've got this beautiful school buildings ready, and we remove the tapu from our tamariki, and they become one with us. And then I think we focus so much on the obligations that they have that we forget that they've got rights in that process. And so in some ways they still live as manuhiri in their own schools. And so we have that responsibility as teachers. We try to make sure that they have a positive learning environment, all of those things. And that's been flipped on its head now. All of our teachers are going into the homes of all of these young people, and they're walking in as visitors to these homes. And it just got me thinking about, what does that mean for me as an educator? How do I make sure that I am honouring that whānau, not just that student anymore, but that whānau and their bubble that they're in? So I think that's where I started to just wonder, it was wondering, what does that mean for us as educators?
So I can imagine, but for educators, that would be like a bit of a light bulb moment for them. And I got that sense with the way that people responded when you said that on Twitter, that it was a light bulb moment for a lot of our educators. And I can imagine as well that some might actually find that quite daunting in terms of, I don't want to offend, I don't want to do things wrong. So, I mean, from your perspective, what are some of the sort of strategies and approaches that our educators might take to make sure that they're treating the space respectfully?
And I think you're exactly right. Those are some of the things that people will find quite daunting and challenging. Some that I heard just last night, actually, and it was a wonderful conversation we had last night. I heard that one of the teachers had recorded a 1-minute introduction about themselves, about who they were, and they sent that home to the whānau, and so that the whānau could see who this teacher was. And another colleague of mine I heard had said he introduced and welcomed everyone, so showed them the place that he was working in. He introduced his whānau and said, "Oh, this is my son, and this is my partner," and then his students started doing the same thing. And so that, I think, it's taking those opportunities to be able to introduce yourself and to be a guest into someone's home, but to not impose too much of what you might be expecting of those learners based on their own conditions. So I think those are some simple examples, introduce yourself, find out who's living in the home.
Yeah, and actually I had a really neat conversation with Adam, who's a New Zealand educator who's now living in Hong Kong, and he works in a primary context. And he was talking about conducting student-led conferences. And whilst they were in the remote space, they actually thought it was a really neat opportunity to conduct student-led conferences, because actually they're stuck in the house with their parents pretty much 24/7 at the moment. And so actually you had this opportunity to have an access to family and whānau in a way that is sometimes actually quite challenging for schools. So I thought that was a really interesting idea. Like, I'm not sure can't remember what they called it, Rototuna. We call ours tutorials, Hobsonville calls them learning hubs. What do you call them at Rototuna?
Advisories.
Yeah, advisories. Yep. All that homeroom, whānau room space for students. And I could imagine there's a really neat opportunity for those educators and those teachers to maybe connect with family and whānau, because you wouldn't want to necessarily be overwhelming the family with every single teacher that they have anything to do with in a secondary school environment. But that sort of homeroom teacher could be a really neat opportunity to connect with family and whānau in a way that we don't normally have the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely, and perhaps one of the things we could consider was that, when we have that physical site and we're on site with those kids and we have that proximity to them in physical space, we're able to probably focus more on that student-centered approach to learn. And we design our schools around students, hopefully. I think one of the things that COVID has helped to highlight is actually in this environment, in the remote learning environment, particularly for Māori, it's that whānau-centered approach which matters, because the child or the student you're working with doesn't live in that bubble in isolation. They might be in isolation from the rest of the world, but they are isolated with their whānau, with their closest. And in some cases, I had the privilege of being able to approach the edges of some of our tamariki's bubbles by dropping off devices over the last week. And what I did recognise is that every single one of them had a different situation and a different whānau situation. And in some cases, there was multiples of whānaus within the same bubble. Yeah. And in some cases, there was a single child and their parents. And so I think that's you're right, there are so many opportunities to connect with our whānau in meaningful ways, because they may also be watching in and listening to the learning experience.
They might just be out of shot that way.
Yeah. Well, often, the kids have their screens facing the roof. Now, they're present with you.
And it's just one of the things I was thinking about as well is, and I think it's sort of part of this conversation. And I remember early on when we knew we were going to be heading into lockdown, I can't remember why I was having a conversation with you. It was about something. I think it was with Di. We were talking about some other stuff. And I had a real light bulb moment talking to you then about the concept of asynchronous learning and lockdown. And that's continued to guide how we're doing things at Albany Senior High School. And I know a number of schools around the country have adopted that. I think that's a real sign of respect for family and whānau as well, in terms of ensuring that you're designing for flexibility and responsiveness to home situations, because our young people often have a number of roles and responsibilities within their home as well. And I think that we need to make sure that whatever we're designing is respectful of that.
Absolutely, and perhaps it's highlighted one of the challenges we've tried to address for such a long time in education with our physical sites. Yeah. That actually we can take some of the gains that we've got from this experience and hopefully build those back into the systems when we move forward. Because I was having a conversation recently again about kids not turning on their cameras. Do you know why they don't turn on their cameras? Is it okay for them to not turn on their cameras? what's the problem there?
Yeah.
You're a guest in their home. And then making sure that their learning can happen. Actually, this is what I think is really happening. Kids are actually choosing when and how they do their learning.
Yeah.
Maybe perhaps they're doing less of the what, and hopefully we can grow that, and particularly enriching those Māori contexts that are available for us. But kids are actually increasingly choosing when and how, because my teacher might be online, ka pai, my family situation doesn't enable me to be able to sit down and listen to quietly to my teacher. My teacher's recorded that. I can take that away later on, work through that, and then come back with some completed work, or having engaged in the learning in an appropriate way that meets my needs as a child or as a student.
Yeah, so that agency, that giving that space for agency and ownership and being able to engage with learning when and how actually meets the needs of the learner is going to be a really important part of this succeeding for any length of time, isn't it? Because we were talking just before we hit record, we were talking about the idea that it's going to be interesting. Like, I think we're in an interesting space at the moment where we've got a bit of a false sense of success with students engaged. It's shiny, it's new, it's a different way of doing things. There's not much else we can do at the moment. So for kids, it's a priority to potentially for some students, it's more of a priority to be engaged with those Google Meetups and that connection side of their learning. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see in 2 or 3 weeks' time if that translates to any kind of readiness for assessment or any way of evidencing their learning. Like, I wonder if, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe we'll be caught out the other way around. Maybe they will have learned so much more and we will have discovered that actually we've been doing it slightly wrong for all of the last few years. So do you see as well real opportunities? We're both lovers of project-based learning, and both of our schools have got a strong sort of streak of project-based learning within their curriculum. If you go back to that idea of the Te Ao Māori lens and that worldview, do you see great opportunities for students contextualising things like project-based learning in this current space that we find ourselves in?
Absolutely, and I think it's probably imperative if we're honest with ourselves. And in my view of that is that for Te Ao Māori, or for at least for Māori learners, in my experience, the collective is often the piece that's missed. That we don't value the collective learning experience or the ability for them to be able to work with others in culturally located contexts, whether that's a project or an assessment or a task or a group activity, whatever that is. The collective learning experience is often drilled back into an individualistic learning experience. So you still need to be able to show that by yourself. Yeah. But what projects enable, I think, in a way, is that community collective learning experience to be honoured and valued, as well as then to present some opportunity for perhaps assessment, but perhaps to deepen learning experiences, to connect it really with the world that those young people are living. And I think that's the power of projects, is their ability to be able to connect beyond the canon of knowledge, to connect with people. And we can connect in their world. If we connect our young people with the world that resonates and connects, or that makes sense to them, then I think we're building them in the right kind of a way.
Yeah, I had just yesterday a chat to Mike Collins at Te Kura, and he was talking about a student who he was, the only thing that interested him was his family's garden. And so his entire learning experience was wrapped around what became a story called Sam's Garden. And he ended up getting, learning about horticulture. He did storytelling about it. He bred all sorts of different kinds of potatoes. It was what, floated his boat. But, I sort of think about that in terms of our the family and whānau context of our young people, and whatever it is that their particular home and household and community is interested in. I hope if this carries on for any length of time, we can start seeing our educators letting go of their subjects and those predetermined, like you talked about the canons of knowledge, and actually say, rather than saying, I've got to get them through X, Y, and Z because X, Y, and Z is in the year planner that we've got mapped out for them, and actually say, you know, like we've got this NCA situation which is on one hand really frustrating, where they're sort of going, you know, NCA is fixable, you can make it work, and there's a whole lot of us educators going, who are you kidding? We're not going to get through all of this. But also, it's nearly like a bit of a challenge that's been laid down for us as an opportunity, and say, look, if we let go of our predetermined plans of what a kid was going to do in 2020 and say, who are you? What are you doing? Where are you living? What's your situation? And actually, the job of the educator is to backfill, curate, collect learning opportunities and opportunities for them to evidence that learning in a totally student-centered. And you've often used the term whānau-centered approach to education. I think I might be dreaming a bit big for this year.
I don't know. I think that could be every every day. I wonder, I was just thinking as you were sharing that though, you know, if we take that concept back to that concept of tangata whenua, and if we treated all of our kids as tangata whenua and ourselves as manuhiri, so instead of, even when we're on site, so instead of our kids being visitors to our school every day, if they had rights and obligations, and they fulfilled those rights, or they were able to live those things, then what you're talking about is absolutely possible. You know, the right to learn as Māori, the right to learn as Claire, the right to learn, the right to be Claire or to be Māori, the right to access success as Māori, or the right to pluralistic outcomes, or the right to have my cultural knowledge accepted and validated. And so if I'm at the centre really as the tangata whenua, and I then go to my teachers and say, hey, look, this is who I am. This is what I'm really interested in. I want to grow those riwai. I want to grow those potatoes. That's my dream. I want to be a potato grower. And so can you help me with the expertise that you have as a teacher when we wrap around and become guests or expert visitors in the learning experiences of our young people?
So even within a school, we're sort of manuhiri in a learner's personal bubble.
Yes.
Even when they're in a physical school, and that's I mean, in some ways, you know, I keep having light bulb moments over the last couple of days. Is part of the challenge is that all of us, and particularly the people that live in the DisruptED space, and increasingly those who have signed up to the NCA hackathon, we're trying to redesign things around a ultimately traditional construct still. We're not willing to let go of the central locus of power and control being the school and its curriculum, which we've designed before we've even met the young person.
Correct. Yes, and your timetable is not a person, so they can't be classed as tangata whenua or manuhiri. Your timetable doesn't have rights and obligations. Your timetable is an actual construct that you've made up to serve some kind of a need. And I think you're right, you know, it's how do we reevaluate and perhaps relook at those things? You know, we'll dream big, but in reality, how do you reevaluate and look at the small things you're doing on a day-to-day that brings that I wouldn't say undoes, that rebuilds some of the things that have been lost for, and in particular our Māori learners, but rebuild that framework that they can live and be who they are, and that will be good for all of your learners. You know, if you've got people who are Korean, or you've got people who are who come from the South Island, I won't single out the South Islanders, but you know, it doesn't matter where you come from, but if you start with that clear framework, I think it'll be helpful for all.
This is also bringing me back to I remember your fabulous blog post that you wrote. I think it was when you were doing the core education e-fellowship work, and you reframed the MLE as a marae, learning environment. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm going to link to that below, because I think a lot of what you're talking about, you know, is obviously couched in your thinking and work that you've done in that space as well.
Yeah, I think if we, that's going back a few years now.
It is.
Rattle the.
It was golden. It was golden.
It was golden. When I originally thought about that, I thought about a lot of the shared practices that we try to achieve in schools have actually already got foundation outside of the school environment. And so if you think about the way in which a marae functions, and many educators, if not all, hopefully, have been on a marae, and they'll understand at these different roles and responsibilities. There's different places within that you might do different things. So your whare kai is where you go and have something to eat, or your whare nui where you meet and wānanga together. That also perhaps as we perform different roles and responsibilities, we understand where each other's coming from. So when we think about particularly open plan learning environments, how do you manage those expectations of your staff to be kind? No one owns the classroom anymore, therefore it's anarchy. Well, no one owns the whare kai, but it still works.
Yeah.
All have roles and responsibilities they undertake to perform those things in the ways that make sense, and also invite and welcome. And I think that's probably one of the things that, if I could say anything about modern learning environments or any learning environment, is how are we welcoming the people as they are, not attempting to change them to something, but welcoming them as they are and transforming them into tangata whenua, or enabling them to live as tangata whenua with those rights and obligations and responsibilities that come with that. So I think it's kind of, I love the notion of marae, because, when I remember growing up, going to the marae, we were always in the kitchen or cleaning the toilets, and there were rites of passage. You learn things, and you learn from others. It's not just the soul. I can't run the marae by myself, So I think there's all of those things. The imagery in my mind, I think, resonates so well with what we do in education. We're trying to create this cohesive, singular experience for everybody, but it takes everybody to be able to make that happen. And it also takes some really clear principles and values. And I think that's something, going back to the work that we've done together in the past, but also connecting in with the leaders. And I would say the DisruptED leaders, it's one of the things is around those principles and values and what drives us. And if we can frame those with a Māori lens to begin with, what will change? Because it's not enough to say, we have manaakitanga, we're hospitable to people. What does that actually mean? And if you framed up your system with that as the foundation to begin with and build from there, what would happen? Would you change things? And hopefully you would, because then you're building it for Māori, but also for all of your learners. So I think there's, that's, I don't know, I can probably go on for a little bit about that, but I think that the whole notion
we all suffer from that. I mean, we could go about lots of things for ages. But I think in some ways, actually revisiting the work that you did there, and you talked about in that blog post and that project that you did as part of your e-fellowship, I think, and then coming back to our current context we find ourselves in, and this opportunity we have to actually look at those principles and how we apply them to being a remote teaching and learning, and going in as visitors to their home. You've got a really nice, in some ways, what's safe for the teacher space to practice some of that stuff. Like, it's actually, rather than thinking, oh, this sounds like a daunting concept, and and the thing that I've learned over the years is, as a Pākehā, you've got to get over yourself. Like I often caught myself not learning and not doing things because I didn't want to be seen to be doing it wrong. And it was only actually through, meeting people like yourself, but also working with some incredible people on the Education Council, where I was encouraged to give it a go, and actually trying is what mattered, and giving it a good nudge. And it's okay if your pronunciation wasn't perfect the first time round. What mattered is that you were learning and you were trying to get these things right. And I think maybe as well, what we can see this opportunity is a really nice, safe space for educators to start thinking about those concepts and trying them on for size as well, maybe.
Absolutely, and I think getting it right is probably one of the most challenging obstacles to overcome. And I'm Māori, yes, but I don't get it right, and I have those same insecurities about not being able to be Māori enough, you know. And so I think you're right. This is a safe space to be able to trial some of those things, but to also learn about what your students' whānau life is actually like. Yeah. And if you can understand a little bit more about them, then perhaps that might influence the way in which you teach them or you work with them to be able to achieve the goals that they have and that their whānau have for them as well. So I think you're right, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's an opportunity, and it's an opportunity in a moment where kindness has been one of the highest priorities for everyone, I think.
And relationships.
And relationships.
You know,
we talk about relationships being critical in education, and now we have to live that in reality, that the relationship in this environment is far more important than the assessment outcome. And that'll get me some criticism probably, but I think the reality is that if our kids are not well and their whānau are not well, they're not learning anyway.
No.
And they're not going to achieve anyway. That doesn't matter to us as people, perhaps, and also our communities, and to us as a nation. Doesn't matter if our people are not well and their whānau are not well. Then we're not really there anyway. So I think there's heaps of opportunity to push ourselves outside of our comfort zones, because we're walking into the zones of, or zooming into the zones of all of our tamariki now. So I think there's really rich learning that we can do as educators.
So let's come back right round to where we started. 2 or 3 things educators can do next week to start this journey if they haven't already.
I think first off, introduce yourself to the whānau in some way, shape or form. That doesn't mean you get the kid to go around with the video.
Round them up. Dad.
Do something to introduce yourself to that whānau. I think that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is find out from, if you can, find out from your students what their home situation is.
Yeah.
And
a one-to-one, not a group situation.
not with a whole class. Maybe a whole class feels like that, but or find out a little bit about who they are and what matters to them.
Yeah.
And I think finally, probably just back off. I'll say that back off. The assessment is one thing, but actually, in the time that we're living in the remote learning space, kids need an opportunity to adjust as much as teachers, and finding that balance between making sure that all of your kids achieve and engage in the way that we think they need to be. I think it's just backing off a little bit and giving them some room to be who they are and to find themselves in this environment as well. So I think, I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Recognising that they're only going to do a fraction of what we might normally think we get through. Because let's face it, we kid ourselves in classrooms. Just because we get through a shitload in class doesn't mean the students are learning that much, But so to give them, make sure we're cutting it right back and giving them that agency and the ownership of how and when they engage with it, because that's showing respect to family and whānau as well.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Thank you, Heemi. And so I will link to your blog post, the work that you did, and or any other links that you want to send through to me that you think might be related to this. And once again, thank you to everyone who has watched this interview today. The next couple of days this will probably be the last of our daily interviews. I think we'll just let them naturally occur from here on in. We've had 3 weeks of, while we're at level 4 and people have been really locked down, being able to track them and interview them and capture a really interesting period of time in our education system, but also in our country and what we've been going through over the last few weeks. So thank you, Heemi, for bringing your wisdom to the table and letting me be a guest in your home. Hi, Gemma. She ran this.
She's busy now. We're all good.
I think I saw the washing go slightly into screen.
Yes, so this is my room, one of my rooms. So yes, the washing came in and then out.
Awesome. Thank you, Heemi. And people, of course, know how to get in touch with you on Twitter, through the DisruptED group, and of course through the NCA Hackathon. Thanks a lot, Heemi.
Ka kite.